On this channel, we've covered the entire Star and Stripe versus Shigaraki fight in detail, which you can check out in the card in the top right. But now, continuing our story series on the events that happened after My Hero Academia Season 6, we've finally reached the Traitor Reveal, so sit back and enjoy as we go over the full story of My Hero Academia's UA Traitor arc. The aftermath of Star and Stripes versus Shigaraki was very harsh on the rest of the world, and as the sun fell towards the ocean to bring the day to a close, every side took a look at what they'd lost and what still remained for the days still to come. First, a search party consisting of Star and Stripes' jet force who survived was sent out to try and locate Shigaraki after the battle. However, no trace of him was found besides the damage he did to a small home trying to dump New Order's quirk away. Very quickly after these events, news of Star's defeat and death would spread through the world like wildfire, shocking all those who knew her as the world's strongest hero and pouring ice-cold water onto any burning hearts that were willing to fight for Japan. One by one, every nation began to fall to the ground in the face of this massive conflict building up in Japan. And with their own issues mounting at home, this event caused every country to withdraw their forces that were heading to Japan to help against the villains, causing the story to move into a territory where more than ever before, Japan is completely on its own, and the heroes that they have are the only ones that they're going to get. This wasn't just a coincidence. This is something that All For One knew would happen if he managed to defeat Star and Stripe, and to take advantage of that, the evil Underlord gave orders to his partners around the world to begin moving and sowing chaos in their respective regions, all to further distract those local governments from being able to lend heroes or any sort of aid to Japan before All For One can claim Deku's quirk for himself. Instead of returning to America, Star's crew completes her mission of reaching All Might and Deku in her place, and thankfully they did, because Star's crew was able to log crucial data from the battle between Shigaraki and Star using their onboard devices in their jets, paired with a fully detailed recording of the battle that the heroes can now study to see how Shigaraki has grown and changed as his body has become more accustomed to the All For One personality fusion. Lastly, we learned that because of Star and Stripe's brutal battle with the villain, his body, which was originally due to be finished in just 3 days after Deku's return to UA at the end of the Vigilante Deku arc, was now delayed for another entire week, which buys the heroes crucial time
to prepare for the upcoming final battle. But this gap in time that All For One didn't account for.
All Might tells his students that all-out war with All For One and his forces is unavoidable, and that they've lost more than half of the heroes they had in the last war. So everyone heading into the next one has to be stronger to pick up the slack. And it's here that we learn that the students all immediately started training after the end of the last battle to be able to fight alongside Midoriya to the end, so he doesn't need to be alone in his battle against Shigaraki. So they've all got tricks up their sleeve ready to go. Within the villain's base, we see All For One sitting in a throne as Shigaraki writhes in pain and his mind fractures further and further. As Shiggy screams about hating All Might and bringing him and everyone who remembers him to their end, we see Dabi talk about how he's done listening to All For One or sticking around for this circus act because he just can't stand seeing Endeavor flying around all righteously in pursuit of those who took down Star, when he himself is such a bad person. This is where All For One speaks directly to Toya, saying that there's a difference between you and me, even though we are actually very similar. You have big plans, but not many options on how to reach your goal, whereas I make plans over decades that all eventually reach the same goal. So no matter what happens, I have a way to get what I want, even if people think they've cut off my options. There's always going to be another option. As All For One says this, he tells Dabi that he's going to be leaving Shigaraki with him while he heads out to get something done, and it's then that he tells Toya another difference between him and All For One, which is that All For One has a lot of friends in a lot of places. And right now, the place where he has a friend that matters the most is UA High, where we cut to see as Tooru Hagakure is standing hiding behind a tree or a wall with her hands up looking very, very suspicious. However, although this is where the chapter for that week ended, this was just a red herring to mislead the fans one last time before revealing the true identity of the traitor. We see all of our UA students training with each other as Bakugo tries to catch Deku at full speed, and on the side we see Shoto as he tries to perfect the fusion between both sides of his body using heat and ice together to create the technique that he uses uses later on in his battle against Toya, which we've already covered in full on this channel in the story series. Sorry again that we don't necessarily do them in order. I kind of do them in the order that I want to. But you can go check out the video about Shoto and Dabi's last fight in the card in the top right. Kaminari mentions that the villains are actually super nerfed right now, with Shigaraki's body out of the picture for a while, Makia completely knocked out, and All For One himself is only wielding a copy of the original quirk. Bakugo and Momo come together to remind Kaminari that the villains are in fact not the underdogs in this situation, given that they're impossible to find right now and can really attack at any given moment, so they'll only do so when it favors them the most. Deku slips back a bit into his vigilante Deku persona and says that he has to influence their actions a bit by heading out and drawing some attention to himself, which makes Ida and the others remind Deku that they're in this together and there's no more solo survivor Deku stuff that's gonna fly while they're all there with him. Deku wonders if it's even okay for him to be seen around UA and if he's gonna have trouble getting back in. But Ida reminds him that Ochako's speech actually did move the hearts of the civilians, so they're much more understanding of a situation and they're more or less back to just being scared and confused with some level of hope and understanding of what's happening. This is where we cut away to Tooru Hagakure, who we saw before standing alone, and now we know exactly what it is that she's doing. You see, Hagakure used her invisibility to hide behind a tree as she made her way over to check on Aoyama, who she says has been acting very differently since the events of the last war arc. Everyone's smiles are diminished, right? Things are definitely different after everything that's happened, but something is just off about Aoyama lately. So Hagakure tries to get closer to ask, but stumbles upon a shocking scene. In the forest, Aoyama talks of his parents, who plead with him to listen to what they're saying. Aoyama's mother tells him that they've gotten a new order that he must follow, and as the family sneaks away to an area outside of UA's surveillance network, they remind Aoyama that he's already listened to All For One's orders in the past during the Kamino arc where All Might fought All For One. So what's the problem now? Why is it that Aoyama seems so heartbroken and shocked that he has to keep betraying his friends when he's been doing that even before he got into UA and before he ever met Deku? This tells us that All For One might have known more about Deku than we thought going into the beginning of the series, but this revelation that Aoyama is indeed the UA traitor was very shocking for some, especially people who don't watch this channel or follow me, despite the fact that we went full tilt on the Aoyama is a traitor theory on this channel, almost to the point where people were calling me insane for believing it. But who is insane now? It's here that we find out that all along, Aoyama has been working for his family, who themselves are working for All For One, to pay back the favor of All For One granting Aoyama his quirk due to Aoyama being born quirkless. Aoyama's parents wanted him to be able to be just like everybody else. They wanted, much like All Might and Deku, to give Aoyama a chance at standing on a stage that he never would have been able to stand on his own. But the way that they did it is just so dark and shows the issues of having a villain who can make people's dreams come true if all they do is follow his evil desires. It's here where Aoyama begins to break down completely, crying and emptying his eyes of tears as he proclaims that he doesn't want to let his parents die for the sake of his friends, and that despite how hard it's been to deal with all the guilt and pain of what he's doing, he must because of the threat that All For One is posing to him and his parents. But it's at this moment when someone walks out of the tree line and Aoyama's family takes notice. It's Deku, looking broken at what he just heard. Deku says Hagakure came running to get him, saying something about Aoyama being the traitor, and he didn't want to believe it. But everything was confirmed to him right there on the spot. Aoyama continues to break down as he thinks about how he was the only one who couldn't say anything to Deku when they saved him or afterwards. He also thought about the letter that Deku left him and the burden that Deku's placing on himself that Aoyama only added to. And in this moment, Deku tells Aoyama that because he was the one that looked the most depressed after the end of the war arc, Deku came looking for him to check on him. And it's this last scoop of guilt that pushes Aoyama over the edge as he comes clean and tells Deku that everything he heard is true. And not only is Aoyama intending to help All For One even now, but he's also helped the villains all the way back during the training camp by giving away their location, as well as during the USJ incident all the way back at the beginning of the series, where Aoyama mysteriously disappeared for a while and was never seen to be in any danger. In this moment, Aoyama's parents try to grab him and run away from Deku, knowing that the lie is up, and here we have a flashback to Aoyama's past to see that his parents truly just didn't want their son to be different because being different is scary. However, because of this, they locked him into a life life of obedience where he repeatedly has to follow All for One's orders, and in a desperate effort to commit to the side that he's chosen, Aoyama fires a laser at Deku, as he says that he fell into the deepest pits of despair after reading Deku's letter and realizing that all along he was just like Aoyama, who was also born quirkless, but somehow Deku still became such an amazing hero, and that really just digs into Aoyama harshly here after all the terrible things that he's done. We see Deku activate full cowling to begin the fight with Aoyama and hopefully dodge his attack, and we also see Hagakure jumping in the way as she entirely deflects Aoyama's laser using her light bending technique. Hagakure herself can't believe what she just heard and stumbles angrily towards Aoyama as she begins to scream at him, saying this whole time everyone could have died because of you, and you had the nerve to live in the same dorms as us and pretend to be our friend. But when Aoyama's parents try to defend their son, Deku steps in using Black Whip and subdues all three of them with eyes full of tears and rage as he tells Aoyama that this needs to stop right now. And he's very lucky that Hagakure was there to keep him from hurting anyone else, as Hagakure cries and we see some of her face for the very first time. Deku brings Aoyama and his family straight to All Might, who calls a meeting of Tsukauchi and Principal Nezu, and for one of the only times in the entire series, we see that the principal looks pissed, as he tells the rest of the class to please step out of the room so they can handle this privately. But Class 1A isn't budging. They say there's no way they're leaving Aoyama's side, asking him for more details about what he's done or asking him if this is really all true in disbelief. Aoyama's parents start to detail how this all started, saying that All for One's grip on them is due to how scary he is, noting that he showed them proof that anyone who works against him or betrays him is executed immediately, and that he always knows where they are and if they were lying to him, granting him full control over their lives and movements as long as they wanted to live. Aoyama chimes in and tells Deku that he really is just a no good villain, that everything they've been saying is absolutely right about him, but Deku isn't buying it. Then why did you save Tokoyami during the training camp when he was going to be taken away? Why did you leave me that message in cheese back then as a cry for help? Even now as you cry, are you crying because you couldn't do what All for One wanted, or are you crying because you think it's all over and you actually care about what we think about you and whether or not this friendship is real? Deku screams that no one should be named the villain for the rest of their lives just because they committed a crime, which is a really strong statement for him to make that I just love, because we don't get to see a lot of how Deku thinks about things in the bigger picture. But this shows us that after committing to save Shigaraki and after the entire Vigilante Deku arc of Late in the Gaunt, Deku has changed and he's capable of seeing the world in a much more nuanced way than society at large currently does. So Deku raises his hands up towards Aoyama and says, "Take my hand, because no matter what has happened, you can still become a hero." As Deku says this though, Tsukauchi really starts bringing everyone back to solid earth and tells another officer to bound Aoyama's mouth and hands, telling Deku that regardless of all of that emotional stuff, he still helped All for One commit crimes, and that there's no guarantee that he isn't rigged to blow up right now, just like Lady Nagant was in the past. So they can't allow him to talk anymore after he gave up everything that they already needed from him, but this is where the rest of the class, including Bakugo and Kaminari, starts to realize exactly where Deku is going with this. Deku's plan is heroic in a sense, but also comes across as a very All for One style plan. Deku earlier told everyone that they have to try to influence the villain's action somehow to get the war to start when they wanted to, and everyone in the room realizes that Deku intends to use Aoyama as bait for All for One to show up exactly where they want him to. But as Tsukauchi still tries to bring everyone back to reality, as the entire class gives Aoyama an impassioned speech about how they all understand that he was too scared to act against All for One before and how things are different now, we see Aizawa calling in through an iPad that President Mike is holding. And it's here where Aizawa tells Tsukauchi that he actually agrees with the students here, and as Aoyama's teacher, he has no intention of expelling him from UA, which is his right specifically due to his agreement with Nezu from before the beginning of the series. And it's here where Aizawa tells everyone that he has a plan as a teacher of Class 1A to help his students and everyone get their desired resolution here. However, we don't hear the plan itself, but everyone agrees that this is a logical plan to follow, so as Aoyama is wheeled away, Deku and the others say goodbye as we see Aoyama being transported through solid steel doors with tears in his eyes, completely bound to a chair along with his parents. students. Following this, all of Class A returns to the dorms, and they try to go back to their day like usual, sitting around in the living room and making cups of juice and snacks to share, but it's extremely quiet and tense. We don't even see anyone's face during this time until Hagakure speaks up and says, "We will definitely beat them," as everyone in Class 1A responds, "Yes," out loud, and we see that each and every member of the class looks furious, like they're more driven now than ever to put a stop to All for One, who has made it personal of all of them one too many times. Elsewhere, while Deku and the others make their final preparations and repair their hero suits, while other heroes like Fat Gum and the Big Three continue to search for anyone else that needs shelter before the final battle, we see Aizawa meeting directly with Aoyama through the glass, much like the scenes where Aizawa is meeting up with Shirakumo or Kurogiri. And it's here where Aizawa tells Aoyama to consider himself very lucky that his friend stood up for him, but reality is a little different from their sugar-coated version. In reality, there's no other option for Aoyama than to fight against All for One in this upcoming battle, to throw away any fear that he has of him, because when this is all said and done, unless Aoyama does something drastic to change the minds of everyone when this story is told, then Aoyama should fear the heroes in society and what they're going to do to him afterwards even more. Aizawa continues to say that right now, maybe they're just like All for One, using him for their own interest, but at the very least, they care enough about him to not let him die. That when everything is said and done, Aoyama is still one of Aizawa's students for the moment, and as long as that's true, they'll never send him in alone, and he'll always be able to walk alongside the rest of them, no matter how pathetic or miserable he feels. Time moves forward and a new day begins, and All for One places a call to Aoyama's parents to confirm that they've followed his orders. In response, Aoyama's mom uses a code to tell All for One that they do in fact have Deku isolated right where All for One wants him, and as they say this, we see Aoyama standing in front of Deku out in the city, and as the two stand alone by themselves, we see that All for One appears behind Aoyama right in front of Deku, bringing us to the beginning of My Hero Academia's final war.